The supplies you will need for week 4 will be your battleizer and the hoop, your optional wool batting should you choose to use that. You will need your units from week 3. So we have our unit 2 as well as our unit 3. Also from week 3 we have our strip sets. So we'll need those, and those are going to go right here. You will need your block back. You will need your wash away thread, embroidery bobbin thread, your thread A for your needle and your bobbin, and let's get started. For week 4 you need to stitch 8 of your week 4 section 1s, and then you also need to stitch 8 of your week 4 section 1 mirrored. So today we're going to be working with the week 4 section 1. I've already stitched step 1 onto my battleizer, which was with water soluble thread, and I stitched the placement stitch. I'm using the optional wool, so that's step 2. So I place that within my placement stitch and let the machine tack it down. If you're not using the wool, you can go ahead and skip this step onto step 3. Just finished up step 2, which was putting down the wool. For step 3, we're going to keep water-soluble thread in the needle, and the machine is going to stitch some placement stitches. Just a little tip, you can go in your machine settings if possible and raise the presser foot height, because as it stitches over the wool, it'll just not get attached to it and drag it along. So this will keep the foot above the wool. And you can see I'm just sort of holding the wool down. So that would be step 3. Step 4 is a match point, and we're going to be using our strip sets from week 3. And the first strip set you'll place in your upper left corner with color 3 up on the top. And the needle is going to drop right where the seam should be. So I'm going to put my strip set underneath my foot and drop my needle right where the seam should be. I'm leaving about a quarter inch to the right of the needle, and that's where I want it to sew my match point. So I'm just going to hold on to my fabric and let it stitch those couple stitches. Step 5 is another match point, and again I'm going to drop it right where the seam should be, and that's to keep your little strip set square. So I'll just smooth it out nice and flat, drop that needle right where the seam needs to go. Actually, it's not a seam, it's the outer edge, but it will keep it square, and stitch that little match point. And I'm continuing with the water soluble thread. So now we're ready for step 6. We're going to stay with the water soluble thread, and it's going to tack down the entire perimeter. And my job is just to keep the fabric flat and smooth. Another match point, this is step 7, and this time we want the strip set with fabric 4 up on top, so it makes like a little 4 patch. And we're going to place the fabrics right side together. You can, just like with normal quilting, my seams were all pressed in the same direction, so I can kind of slide it down. I can hold my finger there and slide it down. I can feel them lock into place. But we have our little match point where I'm going to put that needle drop right exactly on my seam line. So we'll stitch that. And then we'll check it and see how it looks. And that looks good. So I'm going to go with that. If it wasn't perfect, I could pop out those couple of stitches here and just try it again. So we'll be back to do step number 8. We're on to step number 8. I'm switching out my thread to a neutral thread in the needle, and it will be to stitch the seam of our little 4 patch. So all I have to worry about is getting my fabric smooth and straight and let it stitch the seam. And let's see how it looks. There we go, perfectly matched seam. So for step number 9, we're going to change back to our water-soluble thread in the needle only, and we'll let the machine tack down that little strip set that we just stitched on. I'm ready to stitch step 10, but I have just a little bit extra seam allowance here that I'm going to trim off just to get rid of the bulk. And step 10, we're going to switch out to our neutral thread in the needle, and we're going to take our section 2 and the side with the 1/4 inch up here will seam to the 4 patch we just made. So you'll place them right sides together, and we'll align them and come back and stitch the seam. So I'm ready to stitch my seam for step 10. I have section 2 right side to the 4 patch, and I'm going to lower my needle just until that needle hits that basting like intersection between your 1/2 inch trim and your 1/4 inch trim. So it's basically right on the stitching line, and that's where I want it to start. I'm going to slow my machine down as much as I can, and I'm going to hit the start button and let it stitch my seam. I'm going to take it just a few stitches and then stop it, and then I'm going to turn back the section 2 so that I can see my basting line from my section 2, and I'm going to line that up with my 4 patch basting line just to keep it straight. And then I'll hit my start. Machine sewing nice and slow, and I can see that it's pretty much hitting my basting line from from my unit 2. And there we go, all stitched on. Step 11, we're going to change back to our water-soluble thread in the needle. We're going to flip our unit 2, our section 2, right side up. And I'm going to, if you're using wool especially, just pull it down nice and firm and allow the machine to tack down that edge. And you can see my stitching line is pretty much hitting my basting line from unit 2, which means I had it in the right position. Step 12 is another match point, and that is to match this seam right there on your section 3 with the seam here. And if you drop your needle in, you should see that it's going to end up right in your seam line. So we're going to place your section 3 right side to the one in the hoop, and the seams are pressed opposing, so you can kind of hold it down and just kind of slide it, and you'll feel them lock just like in regular quilting. And I've made a little dot at my intersection with a friction marker, lowering my needle and checking my position, and I think that's going to be right, so I'll go ahead and stitch my match point. And then we'll check it and see how it looks. That works for me. Step 13 is the seam to attach our section 3. And to check for placement of section 3, you just want to drop your needle down, and you're aiming for the basting stitch on your unit and for that top little intersection up here. So I've got it placed correctly. Once you have it placed correctly, take a stylus or something that you can hold it down with and press start. And I still have my machine running very slow. And it's actually stitching right on the basting line. When I get to my match point, I'm going to stop it. And I'm going to turn back my unit and line up my basting line from my unit to the basting line on the block itself that's in the hoop, just to be sure I'm still going straight, and I am. Let's see how we did. There we go, we're on to step 14. Step 14, we're going to place water-soluble thread in the needle, and we're going to let the machine baste down these 2 units. A little tip for step 14, I've already threaded my machine with the water-soluble thread. Because I'm using wool and it's puffy, when you pull these units over, just give them just a little bit of tension. Because if you just give them not enough tension, they're going to puff up and you're going to end up with too much fabric here. So I just pull them over nice and snug, touch my start button, and I stay with it pretty well. Keeping the machine slow so I can stay ahead of it. And it's going to come over into section 2 as well, so I'm going to want to pull that one down, keeping my fabric taut. And now the front of my block's done, and we're ready to go on to placing the back. I wanted to point out before I do the back that you will notice some water-soluble stitching on the face of your block in between your seams from your section 2 and your section 3. That's fine. Those are there on purpose because it helps you line it up. They're tack down stitches, but we had to put them right on the seam line so you would know where to align everything. And that's why we use water soluble, because when you wash your quilt or spritz it with water, it'll go away. So my next step is step 15, and it's to go ahead and turn my hoop over and place my back and continue with the water soluble thread and stitch the back on. Step 16 is our final step, and it's the quilting, and we will place thread A in the needle and the bobbin and stitch the quilting. Before you begin quilting, if your automatic thread cutter has been on, go ahead and turn it off to make a nicer looking back. Also, you're going to want to bring up your bobbin thread by touching your needle up down. Bring up your bobbin thread, sew a few stitches, and then you can stop and trim that bobbin thread. That'll also make for a nicer looking back on your block. Time to trim up our block. On the last page of your directions, read carefully how to trim up these blocks. If you're not adding the optional border, you're going to want to trim 1/4 inch from your basting line on the edge marked in red on your instructions. So on my block, that would be up at the top right here. I, however, am going to add the border, so I'm trimming all 4 sides with my Trimmer by George. So to do that, I turn back the face of my fabric, the face of my block, take the metal edge of my trimmer and sort of shimmy that up to the block basting line, lay the trimmer down, and with a 60mm rotary cutter, you rotary cut off your battleizer and your backing. Totally remove it. So I will do that on all 4 sides. Being careful to not have any fabric poke out. past that metal edge, because if you do, it will get cut off. So once all 4 sides of my battleizer and backing are trimmed, then I'll turn over my Trimmer by George and follow my 1/4 inch line, placing that on my outer basting stitch on the block and just trimming up my block. So this is the block that's not mirrored, so you'll make 8 of these, and you'll make 8 of the mirrored blocks. And when you're finished, you will have this. This is how they will go together on your quilt. So here's a peek at our week 4, our 4 blocks sewn together. That's the mirrored blocks as well as the unmirrored blocks. And I wanted to point out, I went ahead and stitched these together. I'm going to sash them just like I did on week 1, or I'm sorry, week 2. So here's week 2. What I like to do is put a pin on each side of my block, and the pin is pointing in the direction that the seam is pressed. So if you look at this one closely, you'll see that that seam is pressed up, and that's the direction my pin is going. And that way, when I go ahead and do my next section for week 4, I've got pins pointing in the direction that my seams are stitched, and I'm going to make sure I press the next block that adjoins to it with the seams going in the opposite direction. So that's what I've done here. So this seam is going up, this seam is going down. So after I get this block sashed, I can put these 2 together and my seams are opposing.